Madam President, Democrats continue to talk about the need to fully reopen the government, and I could not agree with them more. It's time to end this partial shutdown and to get the government fully operating again. But there's a problem. Democrats may talk a lot about the need to reopen the government, but they're not willing to do the work that would be required to actually get the government open. Madam President, in a divided government, negotiation and compromise are essential. If you want to get something done in a divided government, you have to compromise, but that doesn't seem to be something that the Democrats understand. For Democrats, it's my way or the highway. They won't give an inch. They want their way, and they want their way only. Now, Madam President, all of us would like to get our proposals passed exactly as we want them, with no changes, but we all know that that's unrealistic. If you want to get something done, you usually have to compromise. The White House has a strongly held position, but has also made it very clear that it is willing to be flexible and to negotiate with Democrats. But, Madam President, the Democrats refuse to play ball, and they continue to hold parts of the federal government hostage. Now, you just heard our colleague from New York, the Democrat leader, suggest that it should be the Republican leader, Senator McConnell's job to solve this problem. But the fact of the matter is, and we all know this, that the negotiation in this circumstance has got to be between the President of the United States and the Democrats in the Senate and the House who have refused to budge on that position. The Republican leaders made it very clear that as soon as the President is willing to sign something and the Democrats here are willing to produce enough votes to give us the 60 votes that are necessary to pass it in the Senate and passage in the House, that he will move a bill through the United States Senate that we can get to the President and end this shutdown, get the government open again, and fund border security, which is an important priority for our country and for our national security interest. Now, that is a position until recently, Madam President, that was also held by the Democrat. The Democrat leader, as recently as December, indicated that to solve this budget stalemate, this impasse that we seem to be having, that you needed to have the support of the leaders in both the House and the Senate, and the President before either chamber should vote on legislation. He suggested the President needed to come out publicly and support of it. In other words, to indicate that he would sign any legislation that might move. And so that's where we are. It's not a function of the Republican leader. The Republican leader is prepared to produce the votes that are necessary to pass legislation to reopen the government. It is entirely dependent upon the President of the United States, who must sign that bill into law, and the Democrats here in the Senate, who have to produce the necessary requisite number of Democrats to get the 60 votes that are required to pass in the Senate. So, Madam President, that's where we are. And frankly, right now, there isn't a negotiation going on. The Democrats' refusal to negotiate is victimizing the very workers that they want to protect. The federal workers that are struggling right now are struggling precisely because Democrats are refusing to work with this President. And that has a lot more to do with politics than it has to do with the issue itself. Madam President, Democrats need to negotiate with the White House to reopen the government. But they should also want to work with the White House on border security solutions. Border security is a national security imperative. No country can be secure if dangerous individuals can creep across its borders unchecked and unobserved. And Democrats, Madam President, used to understand this. In 2006, the Democrat leader and the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee voted for legislation to authorize a border fence. They were joined in their vote by then Senator Biden, then Senator Clinton, and then Senator Obama. In 2013, every Senate Democrat supported legislation requiring the completion of a 700-mile fence along our southern border. This legislation would have provided $46 billion for border security and $8 billion specifically for a physical barrier. As recently as last year, nearly every Senate Democrat supported $25 billion in border security. My point, Madam President, is that the Democrats here in the Senate have in the past recognized the importance, one, of securing the border, and two, how important a physical barrier is as a part of the solution to securing our border. Not entirely dependent upon a border wall, but certainly a part of that solution to include technological solutions and manpower and additional personnel, cameras, sensors, all the modern technology that we have, but in certain places recognizing that the fence works. And the fence has worked. There are almost 700 miles of fence already on the southern border. And I would point out that in 2009, the Senate Democrat leader said in a speech, and I quote, "Any immigration solution must recognize that we must do as much as we can to gain control of our borders as soon as possible," end quote. That from 2009 from the Senate Democrat leader. He went on to discuss, interestingly enough, progress that had been made on border security between 2005 and 2009, including, and I quote, "construction of 630 miles of border fence that create a significant barrier to illegal immigration on our southern land border," end quote. That from the Democrat leader in 2009, again, crediting the construction of 630 miles of border fence that create a significant barrier to illegal immigration on our southern land border. In other words, Madam President, in 2009, the Democrat leader not only didn't oppose border fences, he praised them. Madam President, the fact of the matter is our border is not secure. Tens of thousands of individuals try to cross our southern border illegally each month. Illegal drugs flow into this country through ports of entry and unsecured areas of the border. Federal agents have seen a 115% increase in the amount of fentanyl seized between ports of entry. 30% of the heroin supply in this country, I should say 90% of the heroin supply in this country, 90% flows across our southern border. And then there's human trafficking, weapons trafficking, and more. We need better border security, including more barriers, technology, and personnel along our southern border. We need to know who's coming into our country and why. And we need to ensure that we keep criminals, traffickers, terrorists, and dangerous goods out of this country. Madam President, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer was asked about the Democrats' flip-flop on border security, whether there's any real difference between what they supported in the past and what they're opposing now. And here's what he said, and I quote, "I don't have an answer that I think is a really good answer," end quote. I don't have an answer that I think is a really good answer. Well, Madam President, at least that's honest. Democrats don't have a good answer because there is no real difference between what they've supported in the past and what they're opposing right now. Madam President, before Christmas, I came down to the floor to talk about the divided government that we'd be dealing with in 2019 and 2020. And I noted that divided government doesn't have to spell the doom of productivity. In fact, over the past 30-plus years, some of our greatest legislative achievements have been the product of divided government. But I also noted that in order for us to be productive in the 116th Congress, Democrats would have to decide to work with us. And so far, they've decided not to. In addition to refusing to negotiate on border security, Senate Democrats have also blocked the Senate from considering legislation to support Israel's security, strengthen our relationship with our Jordanian allies, and hold accountable individuals who participated in the atrocities of the Assad regime in Syria. Madam President, despite our divided government, we can still accomplish important things for the American people. But it's going to require an about-face from Democrats who have so far made the 116th Congress about partisanship and their hostility to this president. Madam President, it's time for Democrats to stop talking about reopening the government and to take steps that would actually do so by committing to real negotiations with the White House. Then and only then can we get past this impasse, get the government open and functioning, and address what is a critical and important national security imperative for our country, and that is ensuring that our southern border is secure. It's not about Republicans in the Senate, Madam President. It is about the President of the United States, for whom this is a huge priority, something that he is passionate about doing, and a commitment he made to the American people. And it's about the Democrats here in the United States Senate and in the House, but here in the United States Senate, where it takes 60 votes to pass anything, to sit down across the table from the President in good faith and to do what usually happens in circumstances like this, and that is to negotiate an agreement where both sides give a little bit, with a little give and take. As I mentioned, the President's been very flexible, very open to sitting down with Democrats. And in the discussions that I've been a part of has been demonstrated his willingness to compromise. But I have yet to see a single step by the Democrats here in the Senate or in the House and their leadership, a single move, a single inch of movement in the direction of trying to solve this problem. Instead, they seem bent on turning it into a political issue. That's not good for the American people. It's certainly not good for those employees who are struggling out there because they're not being paid. And it's certainly not good for the crisis that we face at our southern border and the threat, the security threat that poses for the American people. Madam President, I hope that we will do better. We can do better, but it's going to require negotiation. It's going to require a willingness to sit down at the table in good faith and to get discussions going about how we solve this important problem. Madam President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.